run it back.
Ay, 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 ay.
Stupid ass game!
Less ass than you? I mean, I hope so. You play this game every day, you know life ass. Why the f wouldn't you? You better be God for you play this shit all day.
I keep seeing the same question around Tekken 8. Is this game broken? Some people say yes, some people say the players and content creators are just overreacting, some people say that the developers have lost touch with what Tekken is supposed to be. And then there are the players who've gone past the anger stage and now sound like they're just attending a funeral for someone who owed them money. And honestly, I get it. For a long time, I thought this argument was mostly about balance. Heat is too strong, defense feels weak, tracking is annoying, and some characters are just too easy. Some of the patches make people want to stare silently at a wall for medical reasons, but balance doesn't quite explain everything. Because Tekken 8 is a strange kind of success story. On paper, almost everything worked. Bandai announced 1 million copies sold on day 1, 2 million in the first month, and by early 2025, Tekken 8 had passed 3 million copies sold, reaching that milestone faster than Tekken 7 did. And that should be the clean side of the story, right? A major fighting game launches well, the brand grows, the numbers look healthy, the company can point to the sales and say, look, that worked. But inside the community, it doesn't feel that simple. Players are tired, Steam reviews are bleeding, creators sound exhausted.
You're gonna give me what I want, or I'm gonna continue to hurt people you love.
You lied twice.
Give me what I want.
And every new patch gets treated less like an update and more like a crime scene investigation. So I started with one question: why does Tekken 8 feel so different? But the more useful question became, who was this version of Tekken actually built for? I'm also not claiming to be an Evo champion. I grew up with Tekken and my first one was Tekken 2, so I know the shape of the series. But what I do know better is money, games, and how big products change when the business around them changes. So this is what I'm trying to understand. Why does this version of Tekken keep surviving after this much backlash? What is Bandai seeing that so many long-term players are not? And what does that tell us about where big games are going? But before we can answer who Tekken 8 was built for, we have to answer something more basic. What did Tekken players think they were protecting? Because the term Tekken player does not just mean someone who bought the game. It means someone trained by a very specific design language. Welcome to Shocking Cost TV. We break down the business side of gaming and fandom. Every video is meant to make you 1% smarter about the money behind the culture that you love. So let's dig in. To understand why Tekken 8 feels so wrong to so many people, we should look at Tekken's source code. No, I don't mean the literal code, the design language. The stuff that the series spent decades teaching players to care about. A lot of players are circling that feeling. The game feels like a sprint that you can't stop. Defense feels weak. Movement feels sluggish. You feel like you're fighting the system as much as the opponent. I mean, yes, it's still Tekken in name. Tekken.
Spend all night playing like Tekken fighter games.
But sometimes it feels like someone strapped a rocket to it, threw it down a hill and called the crash player engagement. But to a new viewer, that frustration might sound a bit vague. Defense feels weak, movement feels wrong, and it doesn't feel like Tekken anymore. Fair enough. And if you're not deep in the series, that can just sound like all players shouting into the clouds. So we need a little bit of context here. Tekken comes from a very specific fighting game lineage. Before Tekken, there was Virtua Fighter, the game that proved 3D fighters could actually work. It gave fighting games a different kind of language, space, timing, body positioning, punishment, and the feeling that a fight could happen around an opponent instead of only across a flat line. Tekken came out of that same world. The connection is direct. Seiichi Ishii worked on Virtua Fighter, then went on to direct and design Tekken and Tekken 2. So Tekken roots are not just 3D because the camera moved a bit. The series comes from an early attempt to make fighting games feel physical. Then Tekken slowly became its own monster. The early games had a martial arts base, the weight, the close range pressure, and the limb based control system where each arm and leg had its own specific button. It made the characters feel like bodies. I mean, yes, weird bodies sometimes. Bodies with terrible family issues, but bodies nonetheless. Then Tekken 3 is where the identity really started to click. It stopped trying to be like other fighters and other games and took over its own thing. Sidestepping becomes universal. The third axis of movement starts to matter properly. Now the game is more than about blocking the right thing, it's about standing in the right place, moving at the right time, making something miss and punishing the mistake before the other player has a chance to even finish regretting it. Over time, that became the language of Tekken. Movement, spacing, defense, punishment, character knowledge. Serious character knowledge. I mean, the knowledge checks in this game are insane. And each game added another layer. Tekken 4 experimented with space, walls and uneven stages. Tekken 5 pulled the series back towards a cleaner competitive center. Tekken 6 added rage and made combat mechanics louder. Tekken Tag 2 turns the lab monster side of Tekken into a full-time university degree. Tekken 7 made the series global, bigger online, bigger in esports, bigger on streams, with rage arts, power crushes, rage drives, guest characters, slow motions and the first clear signs of Tekken becoming more spectator friendly. So by the time you get to Tekken 8, the series has already changed a lot. Now, nobody serious is pretending that old Tekken was pure. I'm not going to do that. Old Tekken also had robbery, it had cheese, it had characters doing criminal activities in broad daylight. Let's not even act like Tekken 5 was the holy temple where everyone played honest neutral and paid council tax on time. Hell no. But underneath the nonsense, players still believe the series had a center. Movement, spacing, punishment, patience, all of that stuff. The little moments where Tekken slows down just enough for the better player to make the other person regret breathing in the wrong direction. So when players say Tekken 8 feels wrong, they aren't just complaining about one mechanic. They're reacting to a feeling that the game is moving away from the language that it spent decades teaching them. And that's why 3 words hit so hard. Now, Bamco, you're not stupid. I mean, come on. To understand why those 3 words hit so hard, you have to look at the absolute train wreck of the first 2 seasons. When Tekken 8 first came out, the creators essentially introduced a new style of play, as we've discussed earlier. The only way I can describe it is this. They essentially gave both players massive chainsaws, turned up the music, and rewarded whoever swung first and hardest. They added features where you took damage even if you perfectly blocked an attack. Suddenly, 30 years of playing smart defense actually just got you killed. Fans begged the company to tone down the aggression, but when season 2 dropped, Bandai Namco essentially served everyone a slice of the same pie. A very aggressive pie. They doubled down on the chaos. They made attacks even more explosive and defense a lot more useless. The game became a loud, stressful casino where whoever mashed buttons the fastest won. Top players threatened to quit, angry fans completely lost it, flooding Steam with bad reviews and tanking the game's rating. Bandai Namco had a massive disaster on their hands. So they needed a magic phrase to calm down the angry mob and convince them that the nightmare was finally over, and that is why those 3 words hit so hard. Back to basics. You cannot say back to basics to a Tekken audience and then act surprised when they think you mean old Tekken. To a legacy player, those words actually mean movement, spacing and punishment and blah blah blah, all that stuff. That phrase had more baggage than a 55-year-old man taking his first trip to Thailand. And I don't think Bandai is stupid. They knew those words had weight, but the community and the company seemed to be using the same phrase in 2 different ways. Because when the community started celebrating a return to old ways, Bandai would step in and clarify. Back to basics does not denote a return to earlier Tekken battle systems, as they said. This is where the misunderstanding starts to matter. The players heard rescue, Bandai was talking about maintenance. They were cleaning up the mess while keeping the aggressive system exactly where it is. And I think that's why Season 3 hurt more than normal patches for a lot of Tekken fans. Season 2 still had angry energy. There was still this feeling that if people shouted loudly enough, maybe the game could be dragged back to its original roots. But Season 3 feels different. People are not reading the patch notes expecting salvation anymore. They're reading them looking for the catch. The hope for reversal is mostly gone. What replaced it is what I would describe as resignation. It's like going through the stages of grief. You finally hit that stage where you accept that this situation is not going to change, and so you simply have to move on. And sadly, resignation is much worse than anger, because anger still thinks something can be changed. Resignation is when people stop looking for the fix and start saying, fine, this is just what the game is now. So that gives us the emotional side. Players thought Bandai was promising a return to Tekken's old battle system. But if Bandai knew what those words mean and still clarified that this was not a return to the older battle systems, then the next question is not, do they hear the players? The harder question is, what are they protecting? And the first real clue is not in the patch notes, it's in the cost of the game itself. This is the part that I didn't fully appreciate at first. I thought this was mostly a design argument, but the more I looked at the money, the more this stopped making sense. To understand why Bandai keeps protecting the direction, we have to leave the frame data for a second and look at what Tekken 8 became as a product. Harada basically said the quiet part out loud. The arcade version of Tekken 7 cost about 10% of Tekken 8. Wow. Tekken 8 is a different financial species. It was not built for arcades first and then ported later like the previous versions. It was built for a global, simultaneous console and PC launch from day one. That means Unreal Engine 5, a massive cinematic story mode, global marketing, voice acting, esports support, DLC, multi-year content plan. All of the expensive shiny bits that make the executives nod in the meetings and developers quietly age 7 years in the corner. This is where the AAA trap starts to appear. Because once a game costs this much, the business around it changes. The company no longer thinks like an arcade developer trying to please the cabinet killers. It starts thinking like a global entertainment company. So let's do some rough bro maths for a second. A worldwide AAA fighting game with this much production could easily be an $80 to $100 million product, or even 120 million project once you include development, marketing, support, and all the machinery around it. The exact number is not the point. The point is what that kind of cost does to the incentives. At that price point, you are no longer building only a game for people who already understand it. You are now building a product that has to convince people who do not. And this is where the design conversation starts to change. It is no longer just how do we satisfy Tekken players. It becomes who else can this game reach? Old Tekken came from a different world. Arcade culture, slow refinement, learning through pain, losing money to the same bastard at the cabinet until something finally clicked. It was built for the guy who played like he owed the devil rent. It lives in trailers, streamers, reaction clips, DLC roadmaps, esports broadcasts, and people watching 30-second highlights on a phone while pretending to work. People who do not know a sidestep from a snack bar can still understand a glowing fist to the jaw. So when people ask, Tekken 7 sold well, so why change it? And that's actually a really good question. 12 million copies worldwide is incredible, but Bandai may be looking at the same success through different lens. The strange thing is that Tekken 7's success may have helped create the problem. To players, Tekken 7 proves the old formula still worked. To Bandai, it may have proved something slightly different. This can be bigger. That is the strange danger of success. It does not always protect the old formula, and sometimes it convinces a company that the next step is expansion. Once the audience gets bigger, the game starts serving people who don't necessarily love the old friction. So now we have the pressure. A bigger game, a wider audience, a product that has to be easier to sell. What does that actually show up like inside the game? And if you want to see that shift, you don't really have to look very far. You just take a look at Heat. Okay, quick version if you have not played Tekken 8. Every round, every character gets this thing called Heat. You can activate to yourself or enter it through specific certain attacks. The screen changes, your character starts glowing, and for a short window the game gives you more ways to keep attacking. More pressure, more chip damage, bigger attacks, more reasons for the other player to sit there and suffer. So if old Tekken often asked you to wait, move, block and look for the perfect mistake, Heat does something completely different. It pushes the round forward. You can see it immediately. The game gets louder, the pace gets heavier. The big moment is no longer hidden inside the movement or spacing, it's right there on the screen. And that makes Heat one of the clearest clues in Tekken 8. I'm not going to give you a 20-minute sermon on frame data. I mean, that way lies madness, and I'm sure there will be one person in the comments calling me a fraud because I didn't mention their favorite attack, from 2018. Harada and Ikeda have basically acknowledged, when Harada was still with Bandai Namco, they acknowledged that the customer profile has shifted. Tekken 8 is built for smoother onboarding, louder spectacle, bigger moments, and Heat sits right in the middle of all of that. Heat is still a mechanic obviously, but it's also doing jobs that mechanics did not always have to do. It creates trailer moments, it gives newer players a way back into the round, it makes the game easier to understand from the outside. In other words, Heat is not just balance, it's marketing, accessibility and retention sitting inside the battle system. And by retention I mean the basic business problem every live game has. How do you keep people playing long enough to care about the next update, the next character and the next thing being sold to them? Because once a system starts doing that many jobs, you don't just remove it, do you? Because players might not like it. Bandai can nerf Heat, they can tune it, they can apologize around it, they can sand down the rough edges when the community starts, sharpening their pitchforks. But removing Heat would not just change the game, it would attack the version of Tekken 8 that they are trying to sell, and that's the trade-off. Heat is not just something players fight against, it's part of the product. And once you start seeing Tekken as a product built to travel further, Bandai's own language starts to make a lot more sense. This is where the story started to shift for me, because Bandai has a corporate phrase for this: IP access strategy. Terrible words, I know, but the meaning is simple. They want Tekken to be worth more than just a game. Bandai also talks about maximizing IP value, but in normal English it just means Tekken has to do more than sell copies. It has to support DLC, esports, licensing, data, partnerships, collaboration and long-term brand value. The game you play is one gear in a much bigger machine. So when players say they're ignoring the fans. Bandai might not even hear the word fan the same way. To you, a fan is someone grinding ranked, learning matchups, labbing punishment. To Bandai, a Tekken fan can also mean someone who watches clips, buys DLCs, follows crossovers and enters the brand through somewhere other than ranked mode. That sounds vague until something very concrete walks through the door. A guest character. Take a look at the new guest character Yujiro, because suddenly the question stops being is this character cool, and it becomes who is Tekken trying to reach now. Yujiro fits Tekken almost too easily actually. He's the strongest creature on earth, he's violent, ridiculous, muscular, and somehow even a worse parent than Heihachi. Which is pretty impressive to be honest, because Heihachi once threw a kid off a cliff and still acted like he was the victim. Tekken is already a game where family therapy usually ends in lava.
29, 28, 26, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
This is a very dysfunctional family. It is a very, very dysfunctional family.
And Yujiro walking into that world is certainly not strange. If anything, the weird part is what took them so long. But the interesting question is not whether Yujiro fits. The interesting question is what job is he doing? And yes, before anyone says it, Tekken has had guest characters before. Gon was in Tekken 3, Akuma and Geese were in Tekken 7, Noctis showed up, Negan came in with a baseball bat. Yes, I like The Walking Dead, but Negan was annoying as hell to fight against. Overall, guest characters are not new, but the job of the guest character seems to have changed. Akuma and Geese were strange, but they were fighting game strange. They were crossover experiments for people who already cared about fighting games. And whether you like it or you hated them, they were still speaking to the fighting game audience. Yujiro is doing something else. He's not just a crossover, he's more about distribution. Yujiro is not here to only deepen Tekken, he's here to pull other audiences into it. A character like that travels outside Tekken. He reaches Baki fans, anime fans, manga fans, Netflix viewers, gym bros, meme pages, and people who do not know what a Korean backlash is, but absolutely understand two angry fathers built like industrial fridges trying to punch the hell out of each other. This is the world modern fighting games lives in now. Trailers, reaction, clips, edits. And people seeing Yujiro next to Kazuya before they even know what a sidestep is. That is very useful if you're Bandai. A returning legacy character gets Tekken players talking. Yujiro gets people outside of Tekken talking. This is why the reveal starts to look a lot less random cool, but more Bandai's IP strategy in motion. So now we have the same pattern showing up twice. Inside the mechanics with Heat, outside the mechanics with Yujiro, and a lot of legacy players were waiting for Season 3 to answer one question. Is Bandai going to bring Tekken back closer to what made old Tekken feel special? Bandai seems to be asking another question. How do we make Tekken bigger than Tekken players? So yes, legacy players may be right. They may be right about the movement, the defense, the tracking, the endless pressure, all of that. And the way Tekken has lost some of the slow, nasty friction that made older games feel special. But Bandai is also asking what makes people look at Tekken. Yujiro Hanma shows which question Bandai seems more interested in answering. And once you see Yujiro that way, the question gets colder. Because if Tekken is being treated as an IP machine, then the hardcore scene can be 100% right about the game and still lose the argument inside the business. because upstairs the question is colder. Does the product still work? And once you look at Bandai's other anime games, the pattern it's as clear as night and day, seriously. Xenoverse 2 was buried in complaints and grind and bloat for years, but it's Dragon Ball and it keeps selling. Shinobi Striker has been a mess of cheaters, balance issues since launch, but it's Naruto and Naruto still pulls people in. And then you look at the other side. When Gundam Evolution struggled, they buried it. When Jump Force failed the business case, they took it out to the barn and put it out of its misery. The pattern is simple. If the IP keeps making money, your pain is manageable. If the business stops working, the game gets buried. Anger is survivable, weak performance is certainly not. And that may be the scariest part of this whole thing. Bandai may have heard the complaints, looked at the wider numbers and decided that the product still worked anyway. Being heard does not mean winning, and sadly that does sound cynical, but I don't think it's as simple as the developers don't care or one producer ruined everything. Big products certainly don't move like that. They move through filters, and the biggest filter is from the boardroom, and I can personally attest to this. To players, Tekken is sacred. It is memory, it is history, it's identity. It is the smell of the arcade, it is the friends that you made playing it. It is the moment 10 years ago when something finally clicked and you realized that the game was not just buttons, but it was language. For some people, it takes them back to the most important times in their life.
I can honestly tell you, like, my first memory of Tekken was Tekken 1. And this is like when it was on the PS1, and my dad bought me the PlayStation, and I was just like, raw, like, this is amazing. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm like, this is amazing. This fighting game is 3D.
Maybe you were 10 years old, maybe you were 12. This was one of your first fighting games. I certainly remember playing Tekken 2 for the first time. Then Tekken 3 changed the world. But inside a corporation, a game is not only a creative thing, it's also a financial thing. It is the salaries, the deadlines, the marketing, DLC, forecasts, executives, shareholders, the ugly boring stuff that decides what can and what cannot happen. That does not mean nobody inside the company cares. That would be too simplistic. We don't do that here. Games are made by people. Artists, designers, producers, engineers, community managers, and developers who probably know exactly how much abuse is waiting every time a patch goes live. But once a game gets big enough, those people are not working in a vacuum. And this is not unique to Bandai. Jeff Kaplan, who worked inside Blizzard at the highest level, once explained the ugly truth of big budget development. When a game gets big enough, art has to share the room with survival.
Like, what sort of ultimately broke me in my Blizzard career was I got called in the CFO's office, and he sits me down and he says, he gives me a date, which at the time was 2020 and was going to slip to 2021, but at the time it was 2020. And he said, Overwatch has to make in 2020. And then every year after that, it needs a recurring revenue. And then he says to me, if it doesn't do dollars, we're going to lay off 1,000 people, and that's going to be on you.
That is the boardroom filter. And I have personally seen a version of that from the inside. I've worked on multi-million-pound programs, big clients, big software projects, big gaming companies, FTSE listed stuff. I've also worked with smaller businesses where one launch date can make or break it for them for real. Yeah, we're pulling people off that smaller project. We need people somewhere else. Bigger client, bigger priority, bigger money. And I'm sitting there looking at my boss thinking, you do realize that you are absolutely going to fuck over that smaller company, right? They have everything riding on this. They need the launch. They need this thing to land. But once the call gets made upstairs anyway, because from senior management's perspective, the bigger client matters more, the bigger account matters more, the bigger strategic priority matters more. And it's not because everybody involved is evil or anything like that. It's usually because the machine is built to protect the bigger bet. Everyone below gets to live inside the consequences of those decisions. And I've been in those meetings where everybody already knows what is about to happen. I'm with my team and we're all joking beforehand on a Slack call, but deep down everybody knows the dread. They look at me and they say, yeah, good luck mate, enjoy the firing squad. By the way, that's what we used to call it. We would call it the firing squad because they knew what I was about to walk into. Everyone knows I'm about to walk into a room full of pissed off people with money on the line, timelines blown up, promises broken, and my job in that moment is not to rewrite history. My job is to sit there and eat the shit. At a certain level, part of your job is literally to absorb anger for decisions that you did not fully make and cannot fully explain. And that's why I laugh when people expect some public facing producer to come out and say, actually guys,
None of this is my fault. Let me tell you which senior person over there made me make that call.
you don't get to do that. You are there to represent the project. You are there to absorb the heat. You are there to keep this thing moving along. So when I look at someone like Michael Murray, yes, I'm going to tie it back to him. I don't reduce the whole thing to this guy ruined Tekken, because again, that would be too easy. But blaming one visible face is a very convenient way to avoid looking at the machine behind him. And this is why that Kaplan clip matters. At a certain scale, the question is not just what would make the best game. It becomes what protects the bigger bet. At this scale, people are operating within boundaries that the audience rarely sees. Budget, audience targets, commercial life, accessibility, spectacle, DLC, retention, and whatever senior leadership believes the brand needs to become. The visible face gets the abuse. The structure above it sets the direction, and once the issue becomes structure, the money matters more than the comments. Once you understand that, the next question becomes even colder. If comments are not enough, if anger is not enough, and if being right is not enough, when does the machine actually move? Spoiler alert, that's usually when anger touches money. To understand this better, we should probably take a look at Bandai's digital business, because inside the boardroom, your legacy skill it's not the lead story. What's most important is whether the division can protect products that still work. And that actually makes some of their behavior a lot easier to understand. Let's look at the post-Elden Ring crash. In the financial year 2023, Bandai was flying high on Elden Ring effect. The digital business was strong. Then the financial year 2024 hit. Digital business segment profit fell from 49.3 billion in 2023 to about 6.2 billion in 2024. Yes, that isn't a small dip. That's quite catastrophic. Certainly not a rough quarter. That is the kind of drop that makes executives stop smiling in meetings and start using words like discipline, review, strategic focus, which is corporate language for somebody is about to have a terrible Tuesday. Bandai also said it had to take losses after reviewing its game lineup. In normal English, some projects were not worth what Bandai hopes that they were going to be worth. Some bets failed, some things had to be written down or cleared out, and the company had to eat the cost. Blue Protocol struggled, other bets struggled, the division had to clean up the mess. Now when a company takes damage like that, it does not get romantic about the purity of how the legacy players think the game should work. It makes them more likely to stick to safer bets, and Tekken is one of those safer bets. Tekken 8 sold over 3 million copies. At a rough $60 to $70 average, I mean that's somewhere around $180 to $210 million at the register. Not profit, I mean, yeah, not even close. Platform cuts, discount, taxes, marketing, support, and regional pricing all take their own share. Again, none of that is pure profit. But to a company recovering from failed bets, Tekken 8 is more than a fighting game. It is a lifeline, a reliable product doing its job. They are not going to panic rebuild a game that sold millions just because legacy audiences hate the direction. They would rather, and I mean much rather, have angry veterans than risk breaking the wider product itself. At that point, you're not asking the question, is this perfect? You're now asking, does this still work? And that's the cold trade that I keep coming back to. As long as the game keeps selling, the gameplay rot that you see and you experience can still look like growth upstairs. So when does community anger become visible upstairs? I guess that's the next question. Usually, well, not usually, it's always when it affects the buy button. A mostly negative Steam review rating is not just a badge of shame, it's also a conversion killer. And by conversion, I mean something very simple. Does the person looking at the store page actually buy the game? When a casual player sees that red warning, they don't think, yeah, I'm more likely to, let me hop in and buy this. They think, maybe I'll buy something else. And that is the point where complaints stopped being community noise and became business risk. The 700 submissions mattered. Now, over the course of Season 2, Bandai Namco would say that they received about 700 submissions, give or take, for feedback. But when 700 people take the time to file formal feedback, that points to a bigger problem underneath. And yes, at that point, the smoke alarm starts getting triggered in the executive suite. And that's why the recent patch made more sense as risk management as opposed to a philosophical reversal. And yes, it proved that if the pain is enough, Bandai Namco will act, but not all the way act. They didn't rebuild the game to old Tekken, and they made things slightly more tolerable. I came into this thinking Tekken 8 might be a balance problem, but after looking at the history, the budget, the audience, the mechanics, the IP strategy, and the money, I don't think that balance is the whole story anymore. I started this trying to understand a strange contradiction. How can a game be so successful on paper and still make so many of its oldest players feel like strangers inside a franchise that they helped carry? It was a pattern. Tekken 8 cost more. It had to reach a wider, bigger audience. It had to sell faster, clip better, onboard smoother, and feed a longer commercial machine. So the thing legacy players feel as damaged, the speed, the pressure, the spectacle, the reduced defensive friction, may not be accidents around the product. They may be part of the product. So when you say, this does not feel like Tekken anymore, you're not wrong. You are just looking at a different map than Bandai is. The answer to the question, why would they want the game like this, is the ugliest truth of all. It sells, it scales, it creates clips, and it feeds DLC. It gives Bandai a global product instead of a museum piece for old heads arguing about sidestep timing. In my first video, I said Tekken 8 sold its soul for spectacle. This is the business side of that trade. The game became faster and easier to sell to people who do not care about the history of the King of Iron Fist. The skill is still there, but the priority has shifted, and the sacred fundamentals were no longer sacred enough to be protected at all costs. Longtime players are not crazy. They are feeling the cost of a giant company pivot. The thing they think is broken may be the thing Bandai built on purpose. So if you've been waiting for Tekken 8 to go back to what it was, you might be waiting for something that the game was never built to be. And this is why the whole situation is so uncomfortable, because if Tekken 8 was simply broken, then maybe one patch could fix it. If the developers were simply confused, then maybe enough feedback could correct it. But if Tekken 8 is doing what it was designed to do, then the problem goes deeper than balance. It becomes a question of audience. I do not think that this is the final word on Tekken 8. The game can still change, the patches still matter, and players should still push back. If you hate the game and still want to play it anyway, play it anyway. But I do think that this explains why the pushback has not produced the full reversal that people were hoping for. Because the phrase "working as intended" no longer includes everyone who helped carry the game here. Tekken 8 isn't broken, you're just not the target anymore.